50-year lawyers. One of your own is here to speak today, Howard Satisky. Many of you have known Howard probably since law school. I got to know Howard in the late 1970s when I was an intern in the district attorney's office, and first met Howard coming to court. Over the years, he has practiced both in government for 4 years. He was a part of an inaugural class of young lawyers who came in with a young Attorney General Robert Morgan in the late 1960s. He came in and revamped the Department of Justice and modernized it. A few years later, Howard left the Department of Justice and entered into private practice and has practiced here in Wake County for 50 years. He managed to have a small law office in which he did big city work. Howard has represented major real estate developers and projects throughout his career. He has given trusted advice to many of the major developers and has assisted in the developments, and also kept a few of them from getting into major developments when it had not been so good. And all this time, Howard has maintained an active law practice, but he's also been such a wonderful part of our community. He's found time to serve in government after the Attorney General's office. He served on the Raleigh Board of Adjustment. He served in the leadership of the Wake County Bar Association. He served as a counselor on the North Carolina State Bar Council for 9 years, and then president of his synagogue for a number of years. I mean, Howard, we recognize he is the epitome of what a lawyer leader in our community is. And I present to you for our message today, Howard Satisky.
I don't know if I agree with all the things that Colin said, but I appreciate it. Appreciate that introduction. Fellow 50-year lawyers and honored guests, I believe I'm here for 2 reasons primarily. Colin asked me, and I'm a friend of Colin's. And the other reason is I think, he thinks at least, that I was a typical member of this class. No more, no less. Like all of you, I'm fortunate and grateful to be here. And these are some of my reflections on having the good fortune to practice law in Wake County for 50 years. I grew up in Fayetteville and would walk over to the courthouse to listen to great trial lawyers such as Jim Nance and Carl Barrington, and was fascinated by their presentations. I decided in about the 8th grade I would try to be a lawyer. Times were different when we started out. I believe it was easier to get into law school, thank goodness, but harder to graduate. Law students looked different then. A lot of us were married, but not to other law students, and many had children. I started law school at UNC after my junior year in college, and I had a law degree and 2 children by the age of 24. My primary advisor on such important things as how many cigars to hand out when the children were born was my classmate, Alton Russell, who sat beside me, was 5 years older than me, and had older children. There were very few women and even fewer minorities in our class. We certainly did not have a prescription opioid crisis back then, even though there was heroin, but it wasn't in our areas. Abuse of alcohol seemed to be part of the culture. Woodstock had not taken place at a law school in 1969, and I did not see many students using illegal drugs. I don't know whether my eyes were closed or not, but I didn't see it. And it didn't seem to be a problem, drugs, when we were in school. Nevertheless, I felt like the times could still be turbulent. We went to popular movies that actually confronted social and other cutting-edge issues, such as Easy Rider, Wild Bunch, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Midnight Cowboy. Now, they were the most popular movies of that era. I'm not sure all of us went to them. I'm not sure any of us went to them, but they were the most popular movies of the era. And the Warren Supreme Court was very busy applying the 14th Amendment to the states to combat discrimination laws against minorities and others. And of course, the war in Vietnam continued to have a major impact on the country. It was interesting to me that I saw in the paper the other day a young student was asserting his rights to wear his hair like he wanted to wear it, and he was being expelled from school. And when I was in law school, I actually did a paper back in 1969 on the constitutional right of a high school student to wear his hair like he wanted to wear it. Because everybody had bushy hair, big hair, and long hair, and it was quite unusual for the times. I don't know what the result was, but in many ways, these things that are important today were the same issues back in 1969. After law school, I was very fortunate, to get a job with newly elected Attorney General Robert Morgan at the North Carolina Department of Justice as part of his first hiring class. Others included future Chief Justice Burley Mitchell and Superior Court Judge Russell Walker, Ted Eatman, and Jim Blackman. At that time, the office was small, and the practice was often to associate outside counsel to assist staff counsel. Robert thought this was a waste of money and not needed, and so he was very determined to bring as much of his work exclusively in-house as possible, and he wanted to give his new hires the best experience he possibly could. We were able to try civil cases on our own and represent the state before the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court. Even though when I left office, I often needed basic instruction on such important legal issues as where to stand in district court when I got into private practice, the experience was invaluable. I had Robert McMillan and others in district court, and I would ask them, what do I do? Where do I stand? A great example of the freedom and responsibility we were given was my assignment to study organized crime in North Carolina, which some of you may or may not remember. The Attorney General was being urged to use some of the money that Congress had appropriated to combat organized crime. Every state had access to this money, but not every state was using it. In fact, few were using it. The goal was to determine what organized crime existed in North Carolina and how best to combat it. Well, you can imagine we had a hard time figuring out how to define organized crime in North Carolina. It was certainly not well-known national groups like the Mafia or the Cosa Nostra, like it was defined in big cities and other places, because we didn't have any real indication of any of that, at least not much. Even though we did have word that the Mafia or the Cosa Nostra may be involved in smuggling cigarettes along the I-95 corridor, and some may remember, we were getting some phone calls from local residents in the Pinehurst area at the time that the organized crime may be taking over Pinehurst, and they were quite concerned. There was a loose-knit group of criminals that we discovered, sort of more on the order of organized crime for North Carolina, were stealing tractors and other farm equipment, and were supposedly originating from one of the deep South states. Someone, I don't know who, called in the Dixie Mafia, and the name stuck. In fact, I got a call within the last couple of years. What is the Dixie Mafia? I had no idea, just the name. I spent a year or so traveling around the state with the wonderful SBA agent, Dan Gilbert, trying to gather information on organized crime in North Carolina. We went to law enforcement departments all over the state, from large to small. And we told them we were here to determine the extent of organized crime in their area. You can imagine some of the responses that we got. Well, you know, we had so-and-so came in, it was just real haphazard. We were asking them, we were trying to gather intelligence and to see what the situation was. And after spending a year doing that, I ended up with a new appreciation and understanding of intelligence gathering and the professionals who were on the front lines on a daily basis. I recently reread a report that we did on organized crime in North Carolina, which we produced nearly 50 years ago, and we outlined our recommendations and our problems. And when I read it, I realized that not a whole lot has changed. It's still the same issues that we had then, and still the same issues now. And I don't know that it'll ever change. Things like electronic surveillance and various things. In the 1990s, I was very fortunate to spend 9 years as a state bar counselor for the 10th Judicial District. Robert McMillan, the Dean of Wake County Lawyers, who recently celebrated his 96th birthday, gave me 2 pearls of wisdom as I was starting my first term. He told me, one, that I was about to join the nicest group of lawyers I would ever be associated with in a group, and he was absolutely right. He also told me that it may be best for me to sit back and observe during my first year on the council. And I admit I had more problems with that one. I tried. My best recollection of being on the council for those 9 years was the quality of the debates we would have on issues impacting the practice of law. Passionate debates, everyone had an opportunity to have their say, but the comments were not only passionate, but very respectful. Some of the issues we spent most of our time wrestling with back in the 90s still seem to take a great deal of time and attention today, such as fee disputes and lawyer advertising and the unauthorized practice of law. We were having a hard time getting a handle on those issues, and they still how to define them, false and misleading advertising, and they still seem to have the same problems today and probably will for a long time. There were areas in which Judge Potter Stewart's observation on how to define something may still rule the day. I won't get into too many details, but those of you who probably remember, he said, "That's something I cannot define it, but I know it when I see it." I've been extremely fortunate to practice law in Wake County for my entire legal career. From the beginning of my private practice, when I shared office space with John Parker, I handled everything from immigration law, which then Senator Robert Morgan sent me and asked me to do, to a receivership from Judge Hugh Bailey, which he asked me to do. And I learned the most finer points of practicing law at the daily trial advocacy clinics held at the coffee shop on the 6th floor of the old Wake County Courthouse by the likes of Robert McMillan, Wade Smith, Roger Smith, Carl Churchill, Carl Gaddy, Earl Purser, who was often moved to tears by the validity of the strongest argument available to his client. He was good to his mother. I remember one time I couldn't wait to hear, I believe it was Carl Gaddy's jury argument. And I just was all excited, and I went in and I said, you know, he had a tremendous reputation. And that's what he ended up saying. He started crying, and then he said he was good to his mother. And the jury may have let him go because of that. I developed great friendships with the likes of Ray Briggs, most of you I think know, who cooked me chicken when he was cooking everyone else pig, because he knew I did not eat pork. And he would stab anyone who tried to eat my chicken, and a lot of people did. And who, along with Jim Kimsey, gave me a better appreciation of bluegrass and country music, which I did not grow up on, while I gave them a better appreciation of how to shoot pool. Now, we played pool a lot, and they may deny that, but I think it's true. And countless others with whom I have spent quality time over the past 50 years. Finally, none of the honorees here today did it all on their own. In my case, I was married when I was an undergraduate to the wonderful lady who's still sitting with me today. I get real emotional, I'm sorry. We have 3 sons and 7 grandchildren that make it all worthwhile, with my special bonus having been the opportunity to practice with my oldest son, Keith, for 25 of my 50 years. Not sure that the bonus was his going this way, but it's certainly mine going that way, which certain people have talked to me about. John Silverstein and I have been together since 1976, and we are grateful to Keith and David Garrett, who do the heavy lifting these days, with the help of our excellent paralegal, Joy Burnett. Thank you, Colin, for allowing me to reminisce for a few minutes on such a happy occasion for so many gathered here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard, and thank you, Lynn, for getting in here and